The universe operates on a delicate balance. A cosmic scale weighs actions and consequences. For those who tip the scales with unchecked privilege, for those who revel in the suffering of others, there is a reckoning. This is the curse of the core. A force older than time, it whispers through the fabric of reality, a harbinger of cosmic justice. It seeks those who have abused their earthly blessings, those who have reveled in the misfortune of others. Their punishment, a descent into the darkest recesses of their nightmares. The core does not discriminate. Its reach extends across continents, across social strata, across time itself. It observes, it waits, and when the scales tip too far in one direction, it acts. The curse manifests in ways unimaginable, twisting the familiar into the horrifying. It preys on the deepest fears, the hidden shames, the buried truths that lurk beneath the surface. The core does not offer redemption. It offers only retribution, a chance for the universe to right the wrongs, to extract a toll for the pain inflicted. Those marked by the core are destined to face their demons, their arrogance stripped away, their sense of entitlement shattered. They become prisoners in their own minds, haunted by the echoes of their transgressions. In the annals of the core's wrath, certain tales stand out. Stories whispered in hushed tones, passed down as warnings to those who would dare tempt fate. These tales speak of retribution tailored to the individual, a personalized hell crafted from the very fabric of their misdeeds. For some, it's the chilling specter of a forgotten victim, their pleas for mercy echoing through the corridors of guilt. For others, it's the relentless pursuit of a past they can't outrun, their sins given monstrous form. But among the core's most unsettling punishments is the resurrection of history's ghosts. Not as benevolent spirits, but as instruments of vengeance. Their fury, fueled by the injustices of the past, they return to settle old scores. And in the heart of pre-Gakko Ameri, a land built on ideals often contradicted by reality, such a reckoning is about to unfold. The year is irrelevant. Time bends and distorts under the weight of the core's influence. What matters is the place. A nation grappling with its own contradictions. A society where privilege and prejudice intertwine. Here, amidst the burgeoning cities and sprawling suburbs, lives a young man named Ken. He is a product of this environment, his life a tapestry woven with threads of entitlement and excess. Ken embodies the very essence of the core's targets. He moves through life with an arrogance born of unearned privilege, blind to the suffering he leaves in his wake. He is surrounded by sycophants who feed his ego, enabling his worst impulses. But the core sees through the facade. It recognizes the darkness festering beneath the surface, the casual cruelty that defines his interactions with the world, and it has chosen him for a most unsettling reckoning. For Ken is about to face the night terrors of the reanimated Redcoats. The Redcoats. Even in the annals of history, the name evokes a visceral reaction. They were the embodiment of British imperial might, their scarlet uniforms a symbol of oppression to the colonists struggling for independence. Their muskets, though primitive by modern standards, were instruments of fear, their disciplined formations a testament to a power that seemed insurmountable at the time. Their presence on American soil was a constant reminder of the struggle for autonomy, a struggle etched in blood and sacrifice. But the Redcoats were more than just soldiers. They represented an ideology, a belief in British superiority that fueled their actions. Their treatment of the colonists, often marked by brutality and disdain, sowed the seeds of resentment that eventually blossomed into revolution. The injustices they inflicted, the lives they extinguished, left an indelible mark on the soul of a nation. And it is this legacy of pain and oppression that the core seeks to exploit. In its twisted machinations, it sees not just soldiers, but instruments of retribution. Their return is not a glorious parade of heroes, but a chilling reminder of a past that refuses to stay buried. They emerge from the grave not with forgiveness in their hearts, but with a thirst for vengeance that only centuries of slumber could cultivate. The core's power animates them, but it also twists their essence. Their movements, once precise and disciplined, take on an unsettling fluidity, their once human features contorted into grotesque mockeries of life. Their voices, once barking orders on the battlefield, become guttural growls, their words dripping with a hatred that transcends language. The reanimated Redcoats are not simply resurrected corpses. The core infuses them with an unholy power, amplifying their physical and mental capabilities to terrifying degrees. Their strength is no longer limited by mortal constraints. They can tear through steel as if it were paper, hurl cannons with ease, and withstand blows that would shatter bone and flesh. Their marksmanship borders on the supernatural, each shot fired with an accuracy that defies explanation. A single musket ball, guided by their spectral rage, can find its mark with unnerving precision, piercing armor and flesh with equal ease. But their most unsettling ability is their capacity for psychological warfare. The core grants them access to the darkest recesses of their victims' minds, allowing them to exploit fears and insecurities with pinpoint accuracy. They taunt their victims with whispers of past transgressions, amplify their doubts and anxieties, and turn their own guilt against them. They become living nightmares, their presence alone enough to shatter the sanity of even the strongest will. The Redcoats' weaponry, though seemingly antiquated, becomes a conduit for their spectral rage. Muskets fire with explosive force, their bayonets leaving trails of ethereal fire. Swords cleave through the air with unnatural speed, their blades humming with an energy that chills the soul. Even their drums and fifes, once used to rally troops, become instruments of terror, their rhythms inducing panic and despair in those who hear them. Their tactics, honed on the battlefields of a bygone era, prove surprisingly effective against modern technology. Their knowledge of siege warfare, their ability to exploit weaknesses in defenses, and their sheer ruthlessness make them a formidable force. Tanks and helicopters, symbols of modern military might, are rendered useless against their spectral onslaught. The Redcoats, once symbols of a vanquished empire, become harbingers of a new kind of terror, their presence a chilling reminder that the past is never truly dead. Ken's journey into a life of excess began in his teenage years. Raised in a wealthy suburb, he never knew the meaning of restraint. His parents, engrossed in their careers, compensated for their absence with material luxuries. By the age of 16, Ken had his first sports car, a sleek red convertible that became a symbol of his burgeoning arrogance. He threw extravagant parties, attracting a coterie of sycophants eager to bask in his wealth. High school for Ken was not about academics or personal growth, but about dominance. He used his charm and resources to manipulate those around him. Teachers were bribed subtly, classmates were bullied into submission, and anyone who opposed him faced social exile. His actions were not born out of necessity, but a desire to exert power, to feel superior in every way. This behavior was not checked as he moved to college. Enrolling in a prestigious university, Ken continued his spree of indulgence. He joined a fraternity known for its debauchery, quickly rising to a leadership position. The frat house became ground zero for wild parties that stretched till dawn, leaving behind a trail of destruction. Alcohol, drugs, and promiscuity were the norms, and Ken was at the heart of it all, orchestrating chaos with a devil-may-care attitude. Money was never an object for Ken. It was a means to an end. He used it to buy not just possessions, but loyalty and fear. He spent lavishly on designer clothes, luxury vacations, and the latest gadgets. His dorm room looked more like a high-end bachelor pad than a student's living space. But beyond the materialism lay a deeper void, one that Ken filled with increasingly reckless behavior. As Ken's college years progressed, so did his arrogance. He believed himself untouchable, a modern-day Midas whose every whim turned to gold. His grades, while mediocre, did not concern him. His connections and family's wealth guaranteed him a future devoid of struggle. This inflated sense of invincibility led him down darker paths, where his actions grew more sinister and his disregard for others more pronounced. Ken's social circle now included not just fellow students, but local celebrities, corrupt officials, and shady businessmen. They were drawn to his magnetic personality and the aura of power he exuded. Together, they formed a hedonistic cabal, indulging in the most depraved activities. Exclusive clubs, underground events, and private islands became their playgrounds, each outing an escalation of their previous escapades. His relationships with women were particularly exploitative. Ken saw them as trophies, to be displayed and discarded at will. He used his charm and wealth to lure them in, promising the world but delivering only disappointment and heartache. His conquests were numerous, and he kept a meticulous record of his exploits, each entry a testament to his vanity and misogyny. What truly fueled Ken's arrogance was his ability to evade consequences. Legal troubles were swept under the rug thanks to well-placed bribes and influential connections. Academic failures were rectified through donations. Even when his actions led to harm, such as accidents caused by his reckless driving or fights at parties, Ken always emerged unscathed. This perpetual evasion of accountability only emboldened him further, cementing his belief in his own infallibility. Section 3. Acts of Cruelty. Ken's life of excess was not just about indulgence, but also about inflicting pain. His cruelty knew no bounds, and he took perverse pleasure in the suffering of others. His college years were marred by numerous acts of intimidation and violence, all designed to assert his dominance and satisfy his sadistic urges. The stories of his cruelty became legends, whispered in fear by those who knew him. One of his favorite pastimes was orchestrating elaborate pranks that often bordered on criminal. He would target the vulnerable, those who could not fight back. Freshmen, outcasts, and anyone who dared to stand up to him became victims of his vicious schemes. Their humiliation was his entertainment, their tears a testament to his power. He manipulated social media to amplify their suffering, ensuring that their shame was public and enduring. Ken's cruelty extended beyond his peers. He had a particular disdain for authority figures who tried to rein him in. Professors who gave him poor grades found their careers mysteriously derailed. Campus security who dared to reprimand him faced fabricated scandals. Even local law enforcement was not immune. Officers who tried to hold him accountable were soon transferred or blacklisted. Ken's reach was long, and his vendettas were ruthless. His most egregious act came one fateful night when, under the influence of alcohol and drugs, he ran over a homeless man. Instead of stopping to help, Ken and his friends laughed, speeding away from the scene. The man's death was ruled an accident, and Ken's involvement was never revealed, thanks to a well-placed donation to the local police charity. This incident, more than any other, showcased the depths of Ken's depravity and the extent of his moral decay. Ken's life of excess and cruelty set the stage for his ultimate reckoning. The Corps, observing his every move, had seen enough. The scales had tipped too far, and the cosmic balance demanded retribution. Ken, unaware of the forces aligning against him, continued his downward spiral, blissfully ignorant of the nightmare that awaited him. The night began like countless others for Ken. A blur of flashing lights, blaring music, and intoxicating substances. He was hosting a party at his usual haunt, a secluded mansion nestled high in the Hollywood Hills, its sprawling grounds a haven for his debauched gatherings. The air thrummed with a frenetic energy, a potent cocktail of excitement and unease that permeated every corner of the opulent estate. Ken, the orchestrator of this hedonistic symphony, moved through the throng with an almost predatory grace, his eyes scanning the crowd for his next conquest. three young women, their beauty amplified by carefully applied makeup and revealing outfits, gravitated towards him like moths to a flame. They were drawn to his aura of power, his careless disregard for social norms, the dangerous glint in his eyes that promised a night of unforgettable, if fleeting, pleasure.
Ken, you're amazing. This party is just wow.
Yeah, I've never seen anything like this. It's like a dream.
Where do you get your ideas? You must be some kind of genius.
Ken, never one to disappoint his audience, readily obliged, showering them with compliments, plying them with expensive champagne, and whispering promises of further indulgence in their ears. As the night wore on, the party spilled out onto the mansion's expansive terrace, offering panoramic views of the glittering cityscape below. The air, thick with the scent of jasmine and marijuana, crackled with a nervous energy. Laughter fueled by alcohol and cocaine rang out with an almost hysterical edge, punctuated by the occasional drunken shout or the shattering of glass. Ken, his arm draped possessively around one of the women, pointed towards the distant Pacific Ocean, a wicked grin spreading across his face. Ken, let's go for a drive, he slurred, his words barely audible above the pulsating music. I know a spot on the beach where we can really let loose.
That sounds awesome. Let's do it.
Yeah, I'm in. Let's go.
I'm ready for an adventure.
The women, their inhibitions eroded by the night's excesses, readily agreed, their eyes gleaming with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. Within minutes, they were piling into Ken's sleek sports car, its engine roaring to life like a caged beast eager for release. The roar of the engine, amplified by the open road, became a deafening symphony of power and recklessness. Ken, fueled by adrenaline and tequila, pushed the car to its limits, weaving through the late-night traffic with a disregard for safety that bordered on suicidal. The women, their bodies pressed against the plush leather seats, shrieked with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, their voices lost in the wind that whipped through their hair. As they sped along the Pacific Coast Highway, the city lights fading into a distant glow, Ken regaled his companions with tales of his conquests, both real and imagined. He boasted of his wealth, his influence, his ability to bend the world to his will. The women, caught up in the moment, lapped up his every word, their judgment clouded by the intoxicating blend of his charisma and the night's excesses.
You're incredible, Ken. I can't believe the things you've done.
Yeah, it's like you're untouchable.
I've never met anyone like you.
But beneath the surface, a sense of unease began to creep in, a primal fear that whispered of something amiss. The first sign was subtle, a faint rhythmic drumming that seemed to emanate from the very air itself. Ken, lost in his own self-aggrandizement, dismissed it as a figment of his intoxicated mind. But the drumming persisted, growing louder with each passing mile, its steady beat like the pulse of some unseen predator stalking its prey. The women, their senses heightened by a mixture of fear and alcohol, began to exchange nervous glances, their laughter dying down to a series of uneasy giggles. Then came the whispers. At first, they were barely audible, lost in the rush of the wind and the thrum of the engine. But as they drew closer to their destination, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, morphing into a chorus of guttural voices that seemed to seep from the very shadows themselves.
Did you hear that? What is that noise?
I don't know, but it's giving me the creeps.
Ken, maybe we should turn back. This doesn't feel right.
The women, their eyes wide with terror, strained to make out the words, but the language was alien, ancient, laced with a malice that chilled them to the bone. Ken, oblivious to the growing terror in the car, finally brought the vehicle to a screeching halt on a secluded stretch of beach. The only light came from the moon, casting long, eerie shadows across the sand. The air, thick with the salty tang of the ocean, now carried a new scent, a cloying metallic odor that spoke of decay and death.
Oh my god, what is that smell?
The drumming, louder than ever, seemed to reverberate through their very bones, its rhythm hypnotic, inescapable. Before any of them could speak, the first spectral figure emerged from the darkness. It was a soldier, clad in a tattered red coat, its once bright fabric now faded and stained with what looked like blood. The moonlight glinted off the musket clutched in its skeletal hand, the weapon seemingly as real and deadly as the look of hatred etched on its skeletal face.
What is that?
Then another figure emerged, and another, until the beach was swarming with them. An army of reanimated redcoats, their eyes burning with an eerie blue light, their mouths twisted into grotesque smiles.
This can't be happening.
Ken, his bravado finally shattered, stared in disbelief as the spectral soldiers surrounded his car, their muskets raised in unison. The women, their faces pale with terror, huddled together in the back seat, their cries for help lost in the cacophony of ghostly whispers and the rhythmic pounding of spectral drums. One of the redcoats, its skeletal face contorted in a mocking grin, approached the driver's side window, its voice a raspy whisper that seemed to slither into their minds.
Well, looks like we have some guests. And what brings you fine folks to our humble abode this evening?
The transition was swift and brutal. One moment, Ken was the master of his domain, surrounded by willing companions and intoxicated by his own sense of importance. The next, he was a terrified animal trapped in a cage of his own making, his carefully constructed facade of invincibility crumbling around him like sandcastles under a relentless tide.
Ken, do something.
The fear, so long suppressed, surged through him, turning his blood to ice, his limbs to lead. He tried to speak, to stammer out some explanation, some plea for mercy, but the words caught in his throat, strangled by the sheer terror that gripped him. The redcoats, sensing his fear, closed in, their skeletal faces inches from the car windows, their hollow eyes boring into his soul. The women, their initial shock giving way to primal panic, screamed and sobbed, their manic energy only fueling the redcoats' amusement.
They're getting closer.
The redcoat leader, its skeletal finger tapping impatiently on the roof of the car, leaned closer, its voice a chilling whisper that seemed to penetrate Ken's very being.
You see, young sir, we've been expecting you. The Corps has a message for you, a little lesson in humility, shall we say.
Ken, his body trembling uncontrollably, could only watch in abject horror as the redcoats began to move, their movements fluid, unnatural, like marionettes controlled by some unseen force. The women's screams reached a fever pitch as the soldiers began to rock the car, their laughter echoing through the night, a chorus of malice that heralded the beginning of Ken's long overdue reckoning. The party was over. The night of terror had just begun. The silence of the beach was shattered by the redcoats' chilling laughter, a sound that seemed to claw its way out of the darkest depths of hell. Ken, paralyzed by fear, could only watch as the spectral soldiers began to swarm his once prized sports car. Their skeletal hands, cold as ice, slammed against the metal, the sound amplified in the stillness of the night. The women, their initial screams reduced to whimpers, huddled together in the back seat, their eyes darting frantically, searching for an escape that didn't exist.
We're trapped.
One of the redcoats, its tattered uniform clinging to its skeletal frame like a shroud, slammed its musket butt against the driver's side window. The glass, no match for the spectral weapon's force, shattered inwards, showering Ken with razor-sharp shards. He recoiled instinctively, his arms flailing uselessly as the redcoat reached in, its grip like a vice, and dragged him bodily from the car.
No, Ken!
Ken landed hard on the sand, the air knocked from his lungs. He looked up, his vision blurring, to see the redcoat leader standing over him, its skeletal face illuminated by the eerie blue glow emanating from its eyes. The other redcoats fanned out, surrounding him, their muskets trained on him, their expressions a terrifying mix of amusement and malice.
Stand up, sir. We have much to discuss.
Ken, his body trembling uncontrollably, struggled to his feet, his legs feeling like jelly. He stood there naked and exposed, his carefully crafted facade of confidence and control shattered into a million pieces.
You seem to have forgotten your manners, young sir. Where are your manners? We were just having a bit of fun.
The Redcoats circled him, their laughter echoing across the beach, each chuckle a sharp barb digging into his already raw nerves. The Redcoat leader, its skeletal finger tapping rhythmically against the butt of its musket, studied Ken with an almost clinical detachment.
Manners, sir, manners.
One by one, the Redcoats began to echo their leader's words, their voices a chorus of mockery and derision.
Manners, sir, manners.
They chanted, their words growing louder, more insistent, until they formed a deafening cacophony that seemed to press down on Ken, suffocating him, stealing his breath. Ken, his mind reeling, his body on the verge of collapse, tried to speak, to stammer out an apology, a plea for mercy, but the words wouldn't come. His throat felt constricted, his tongue thick and useless. He could only stand there, naked and humiliated, as the Redcoats continued their relentless assault, their laughter echoing in his ears like the tolling of a funeral bell. The Redcoats' reign of terror wasn't confined to the secluded beach. As Ken endured his personal torment, the spectral army unleashed its fury upon the unsuspecting city. The transition from eerie silence to utter chaos was as sudden as it was terrifying. One moment, the cityscape glittered peacefully under the moonlight. The next, it was engulfed in a maelstrom of otherworldly violence.
The spectral soldiers, their numbers seemingly endless, surged through the streets, their ghostly forms materializing from the shadows, their presence heralded by the chilling beat of spectral drums and the mournful wail of phantom fifes. Buildings crumbled under their touch, their once solid walls offering no resistance to the supernatural force that animated these vengeful spirits.
The citizens of ancient Gatco, accustomed to a life of comfort and security, were ill-prepared for the sudden onslaught. Panic spread through the streets like wildfire as people fled their homes and businesses, desperate to escape the spectral army's wrath. Car horns blared uselessly, their sounds swallowed by the cacophony of crumbling concrete, ghostly screams, and the Redcoats' chilling laughter. The city, once a symbol of modernity and progress, was transformed into a scene of apocalyptic chaos. Its streets littered with debris, its air thick with the stench of fear and decay.
The Redcoats, their thirst for vengeance insatiable, moved through this maelstrom with an eerie grace, their spectral forms seemingly impervious to the bullets and missiles hurled at them by the city's bewildered and outmatched defenders.
Back on the beach, Ken, stripped of his arrogance and bravado, felt the full weight of his past sins crushing down on him. The Redcoats, their initial amusement fading into something colder and crueler, continued their psychological torture, their words like poisoned darts aimed at the most vulnerable parts of his psyche.
Do you remember the homeless man, Ken? The one you left to die on the cold pavement?
Ken closed his eyes, trying to block out the memory, but it was no use. The image of the man's broken body, illuminated by the harsh glare of his headlights, flashed before his eyes, as vivid and horrifying as the night it happened. He could almost hear the sickening thud, feel the jolt of the impact, smell the metallic tang of blood.
We remember, Ken, we remember all of it. Every act of cruelty, every selfish indulgence, every life you've trampled on your way to the top.
Ken sank to his knees, his body racked with sobs, the weight of his guilt threatening to crush him. He looked up at the Redcoats, their skeletal faces illuminated by the cold moonlight, and for the first time in his life, he understood the true meaning of fear. This wasn't the fear of physical pain or social humiliation. This was the fear of a reckoning that was long overdue, a fear that gnawed at his soul, reminding him that some sins could never be outrun, some debts could never be repaid. As the Redcoats continued their assault on the city, the true extent of their vengeance began to unfold. The spectral soldiers moved with a purpose, their movements orchestrated with a terrifying precision. They targeted infrastructure, collapsing bridges and tearing down power lines. The once bustling metropolis was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the eerie blue glow of the Redcoats' eyes and the flickering fires that dotted the skyline. Citizens huddled in their homes, barricading doors and windows in a futile attempt to keep the supernatural invaders at bay. The sound of the Redcoats' rhythmic drumming was omnipresent, a constant reminder of the horror unfolding outside. The spectral soldiers moved through the streets like a plague. Their presence felt long before they were seen. Shadows flickered in the corners of terrified eyes, and whispers of ancient curses filled the air. Emergency services were overwhelmed. Firefighters, police officers, and paramedics found themselves powerless against the supernatural onslaught. Their equipment malfunctioned, their vehicles rendered useless by the Redcoats' unholy power. Attempts to communicate were futile as radio signals were drowned out by the ghostly cacophony. The city, once a symbol of modernity and progress, was reduced to a primitive state, its inhabitants left to fend for themselves in the face of an ancient terror. Amidst the chaos, pockets of resistance began to form. Groups of citizens, driven by desperation and a will to survive, banded together to fight back. Armed with whatever they could find, kitchen knives, baseball bats, makeshift torches, they took to the streets, determined to defend their homes and loved ones. But their bravery was no match for the Redcoats' supernatural strength and cunning. Each skirmish ended in tragedy, the valiant efforts of the city's defenders crushed under the weight of spectral rage. The city's descent into madness was swift and brutal. As the Redcoats tightened their grip, the social fabric began to unravel. Looting and violence erupted as the thin veneer of civilization was stripped away. People turned on each other, neighbors becoming enemies, friends becoming foes. The city's elite, those who had once reveled in their privilege, found themselves no better off than the destitute, their wealth and status meaningless in the face of the supernatural threat. Ken, now a broken shell of his former self, wandered through the chaos, his mind reeling from the horror he had witnessed. The once arrogant young man was now a terrified animal, his every step haunted by the echoes of his past transgressions. The Redcoats' whispers followed him wherever he went, their words a constant reminder of his sins. He saw the faces of those he had wronged in every shadow, their eyes accusing, their voices filled with pain. The city's landmarks, once symbols of its greatness, were reduced to ruins. The Grand Library, a repository of knowledge and culture, was consumed by flames. The bustling marketplace, a hub of commerce and community, was a scene of desolation. Its stalls overturned, its wares scattered and trampled. The parks, once places of peace and recreation, were now battlegrounds, their greenery stained with blood and ash. Despite the overwhelming terror, there were moments of humanity amidst the chaos. Strangers helping strangers, risking their lives to save others, offering solace and support in the darkest of times. These acts of kindness, small and fleeting, were beacons of hope in a world turned upside down. But they were not enough to stem the tide of destruction. The Redcoats' vengeance was relentless, their hunger for retribution insatiable. As the siege reached its climax, the true nature of the Redcoats' vengeance became clear. This was not just a punishment for Ken, but a reckoning for the entire city. The Corps had chosen ancient Gagco as the stage for its grand spectacle of cosmic justice, a reminder that no one was beyond the reach of retribution. The city's history of privilege and oppression, of excess and cruelty, had finally caught up with it, and the price was being paid in blood and tears. Ken, now a shadow of his former self, found himself drawn to the heart of the city, where the Redcoats had gathered for their final act. The once bustling square was now a scene of devastation, its grand statues toppled, its fountains dry and cracked. The spectral soldiers stood in a circle, their eyes glowing with an unearthly light, their voices raised in a haunting chant. At the center of the circle stood the Redcoat leader, its skeletal face twisted into a sinister smile.
Welcome, Ken. You have come to witness the final act of our vengeance. It is not for us to stop. The cause justice is absolute. You and your city must face the consequences of your actions. Ken, his body trembling with fear, approached the circle, his mind a whirlwind of guilt and regret. The Redcoat leader turned to face him, its eyes boring into his soul. Ken, please make it stop.
As the Redcoats' chant reached a crescendo, the ground beneath Ken's feet began to tremble. The air grew thick with the scent of decay and death, and the sky darkened as if the very heavens were closing in. Ken, his mind shattered, could only watch as the Redcoats raised their muskets, their voices rising in a final triumphant cry. The city, once a beacon of progress and prosperity, was now a testament to the power of retribution. The Corps' message was clear. No one could escape the consequences of their actions. Ken and all those who had reveled in their privilege and excess had finally been brought to account. The sun rose on a city transformed. Ancient Gagco, once vibrant and teeming with life, now lay cloaked in an unsettling silence. The once gleaming skyscrapers stood as hollow husks, their glass eyes shattered, their steel bones twisted into grotesque parodies of their former glory. Smoke curled from countless pyres, a grim testament to the Redcoats' fiery retribution. The air, thick with the stench of ash and decay, carried a chilling whisper, the lingering echo of the spectral army's rage. Ken, his body bruised and broken, his mind teetering on the precipice of madness, wandered through the desolate streets. He was a ghost haunting the ruins of his own creation, his once sharp features now etched with a profound and irreversible terror. The city's destruction mirrored his own internal landscape, a shattered reflection of the man he had been, the monster he had become. The ghosts of his victims, once distant whispers in the recesses of his conscience, now manifested as tangible horrors. He saw their faces in the shattered windows, heard their screams echoing through the wind that howled through the canyons of broken concrete. The homeless man, his eyes forever frozen in a mask of terror, followed Ken relentlessly, a chilling reminder of the consequences of his actions. The Redcoats were gone, their spectral forms having retreated back into the shadows from whence they came, but their presence lingered, a palpable weight pressing down on Ken's soul, a constant reminder that he was forever marked by their touch. He had been granted a reprieve, but not a pardon. Word of ancient Gakko's fate spread like wildfire, a chilling parable whispered in hushed tones from coast to coast. The city became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that the pursuit of pleasure at the expense of others carried a hefty price. Ken, his name synonymous with arrogance and cruelty, became a figure of both revulsion and pity, his story a chilling reflection of a society teetering on the brink of moral collapse. But the Redcoats' march didn't end with ancient Gakko. Their thirst for retribution, fueled by centuries of injustice, could not be so easily quenched. Reports surfaced from cities across the nation, whispers of spectral soldiers appearing in the dead of night, their presence heralded by the chilling beat of drums and the haunting melodies of phantom fifes. The targets were always the same: those who had abused their power, who had turned a blind eye to the suffering of others, who had embraced a life of excess and greed. Politicians, CEOs, celebrities, none were immune to the Redcoats' spectral judgment. Their reign of terror was indiscriminate, their message clear. The scales of justice were being balanced, one haunting at a time. Ken, forever haunted by the events that had shattered his life, became a nomad, drifting from town to town, desperate to outrun the shadows of his past. But there was no escape. The Redcoats' presence followed him, their spectral drums beating in time with his racing heartbeat, a constant reminder that true justice could never be outrun. The Redcoats' reign of terror sparked a wave of introspection across the nation. People began to question their own actions, to examine the consequences of their choices. The pursuit of wealth and status, once seen as the ultimate goal, now felt hollow, insignificant in the face of the Redcoats' chilling judgment. A new generation arose, one marked by the horrors they had witnessed. They rejected the excesses of their predecessors, embracing a simpler, more compassionate way of life. They understood that true happiness lay not in material possessions or social standing, but in empathy, in service to others, in the pursuit of a more just and equitable world. The Redcoats story, once a tale of terror, became a catalyst for change. It served as a stark reminder that the past was never truly dead, that the consequences of our actions, both individual and collective, reverberated through time. It was a call to action, a plea for accountability, a demand for a better future. And so the legacy of the Redcoats lived on, not in the ruins of ancient Gagco, but in the hearts and minds of those who had learned from its tragic fate. The spectral army may have retreated back into the shadows, their mission of retribution complete, but their message continued to echo through the ages. Justice may be delayed, but it will always be served.